I'm Karin Slaughter, and this is my latest book in Germany. It's called Triptych. It's a story in 3 parts with 3 different narrators. Of course, the word triptych means 3 hinged stories, and they all come together to make one, hopefully for the reader, exciting puzzle that they can solve by the end. This is a story that takes place in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, and I wouldn't recommend you use this as a tourist guide because there's a lot of things going on that perhaps the usual tourist wouldn't want to see. There's some dastardly murders. The Atlanta police is involved. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation comes in, and basically it opens up with a prostitute who's violently slain, and my detectives and the special agents with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation have to figure out what's going on. And what we find out very quickly is that things aren't always what they seem. Michael Ormewood is the classic detective. He works at the Atlanta Police Department, and he's on the homicide squad. He's a little tired and run down from being in the homicide squad. We have a lot of murders in Atlanta. And then there's Will Trent, who's a special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and he comes in and he tries to work with Michael on this particularly brutal case that's happened in Atlanta where a prostitute's murdered. And Angie Polaski is probably one of my favorite characters in this book. You know, a lot of books you find written by women, the women are in really crappy relationships. Well, now it's Will's turn. You know, he's in this relationship with Angie, and she's sort of mean to him and probably not the best person for him. And it's really enjoyable for me to finally have a book where it's the man who's in the bad relationship. You know, my Grant-County series, family is so important to Sara. You know, she has her mother and father, and Lena has her Uncle Hank. And so I thought it would be really challenging to have a character who didn't have a family, and that's where Will Trent came from. Michael has a very strong-willed mother, you know, probably not the nicest of women. And, of course, Angie also grew up in the Atlanta Children's Home, so she doesn't really have a family. Her mother overdosed, and she doesn't have a relationship with her, really. Her mother's in a coma in a state hospital somewhere. And I like the idea of having people untethered because we're so defined by our families. And to have Will and Angie, 2 characters who don't have families, they only have each other, was a great challenge for me. Well, I think it's definitely necessary to the story because, you know, when I write about graphic violence, I try to put it in context. I want my readers to know what's happening to people. I really do like some books that kind of don't go into the graphic area of it, but my favorite novelists like Mo Hayder or Denise Mina or Tess Gerritsen or Jeffrey Tolliver, you know, these are writers who are writing about crime in a very realistic way. And when I sat down to write my books, I thought, I want to do that too. I want to really show my reader what's happening and hopefully help them develop some empathy with the characters and understand why my detectives are so driven to try to solve the crime. Well, I wish I knew where I got my ideas. I'd bottle it so that I could keep them someplace where I could always go to them if I needed to. But it's a very organic thing. I love television. I watch a lot of television. I know German TV here has a lot of detective shows with strong women characters, so I find that very inspiring to hear stuff like that when I travel, and it makes me want to really craft my female characters so that I'm being honest to women and showing women in strong ways. But always it starts with me thinking about some kind of murder, you know, and what will my detectives do when they find this body? How will they solve this crime? I want to move beyond the violence. You know, of course, there is some violence in there, but I want to move beyond that and show how the detectives figure things out. And really, when I'm thinking about the story, that's what I'm concentrating on, is giving my readers enough clues to figure out the story along the way. The next book in the series that's coming out in Germany is called Skin Privilege, and this is a book that in America is called Beyond Reach, just to confuse people. But it's a really gripping story. Lena goes back to her hometown of Reese. Her Uncle Hank has gotten into some trouble, and she's trying to keep Jeffrey and Sara out of this, but unfortunately, as Lena often does, she brings them into the mix, and they end up being confronted with a really horrible criminal, and a lot of stuff from Lena's past comes up, which to me is exciting because I love reading series books, and I love reading, you know, Jeffrey Tolliver and finding out new things about old characters, and you find out a lot of new things about Lena in this book.